welcome to Turn the Page, the official podcast of the Syosset Public Library.
Okay, very good. Hi, everybody. This is Barney Levantino. Welcome to Turn the Page, the Syosset Library podcast. I have my colleague, Jessikah, with us. Say hi, Jessikah.
Hey, everyone. How are you?
And very excited today. We have a really special guest with us today. Former congressman from here in New York's 2nd and New York's 3rd Congress. Who served in Congress from 2001 to 2017. Author and just all around interesting guy. Welcome, Steve Zirin.
Well, it's great to be with both of you. Thanks for having me on. And I know you probably hear a lot going on in the background. We're doing this podcast as we're unpacking books and shelving them for the opening of Theodores Books.
That is your newest project, your newest venture, Theodore Books in the town of Oyster Bay, correct?
It is. You know, I used to fly on Air Force One with the President of the United States. Now I'm opening cartons and crushing cardboard and shelving books and crawling around the basement looking for utility hookups. But I must say I'm much happier doing what I'm doing now than I was doing what I was doing then.
I can't think of a better way to spend a morning personally, but that's just me.
Well, the problem is that I want to just take every one of these books home and read them, but I got to sell them, I'm told. So I have to change my business.
You know what? Sell them from your store. Come to the library. We'll give you copies for free.
Sounds good.
It's funny. Before we get into the nuts and bolts of Theodore Books, it's fortuitous today happens to be November 2nd, Election Day. So my question to you is, as a former politician, how does Election Day feel for you on a day when you don't really have any skin in the game directly?
Well, actually, I would politely disagree with you. I think we all have skin in the game.
Okay.
In a democracy, we all have equity in our country, in our community, and we all have an obligation, whatever our philosophies may be, to participate and involve ourselves. But it's a good question. Every election day for me was, like the Super Bowl, right? So every 2 years it was Super Bowl Sunday. And, I was very fortunate because I was privileged to have the support of a majority of constituents, but I never took anything for granted. So there was always a nervousness about what might happen. Now it's like sitting, it's like being an observer. I'm still very deeply involved in politics and have relationships in the White House and with my former colleagues on both sides of the aisle in Congress. But it's more of an observer. It's like, I'm a huge fan of the Mets. For me, the only thing I was ever partisan about was my beloved New York Mets. So, I never got to play the game on the field with the Mets, but, I went to a lot of games, and now I feel like I'm sitting in the stadium watching all that action on the field on Election Day.
I love the analogy. I really do. And I love that you said, that's a good point. There's always, we all have skin in the game when it comes to it. Yeah, good. Well said.
Now more than ever, by the way. I worry about the status of our democracy and the decline of democratic norms. So, these elections are more important than they ever have been, in my view.
It's funny. I was going to come back to this point, but you kind of raised it now. And you were an effective congressman. And
thank you.
Well, substantively, I was never your constituent, but I always kind of follow what you're doing. Substantively, you and I probably are not on the same page on a number of things. You can't do that to me. I don't know. Two of the most significant, Jessica's children are running around. But that's two of the things that I thought were great about your service is one, you left when you felt it was time to leave voluntarily, which is what I think is kind of the way to go. And secondly, what jumped out at me is you were one of the founders of the Across the Aisle Caucus,
Mm-hmm.
which is to me really the significant way that we need to do it. And it seems like that's just gone. There's no middle anymore. And as a consequence, everything is still there.
Yeah, I'm here.
Everything has become red, blue, Republican, Democrat. It seems like the middle is completely gone. And how do we get back to that?
Well, you're exactly right, and I can give you some very specific evidence of that. When I was elected to Congress in 2000 from Long Island, there were about 150 congressional districts that were considered in the middle, meaning a Democrat or a Republican could win. And when I chaired the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee in 2011, the number of competitive districts had been cut in half, 75. And today, believe it or not, there are about 20 moderate districts in the very middle. Now, what happened? How is it that we went from 150 moderate districts to 20? Part of it was this horrific process of political gerrymandering, where districts are drawn in order to protect incumbents, not to ensure that members of Congress are representing an equivalent number of people across America. And so when you draw a district to protect a Democratic incumbent or a Republican incumbent, what you're doing effectively is you're making districts more partisan. So if you want a more Democratic district, guess what? It's going to be further to the left. And if you want a more Republican district, it's going to be further to the right. So that process has pretty much made moderate members of Congress who seek compromise and civility an endangered species. I was one of those moderates. I was a left of center moderate, not far left, but just to the left of center. And most of my constituents were in that spot too. But by the time I left, even my district was going further to the left because of gerrymandering. And so that's the first big problem. The second big problem, and here, now that I'm out of Congress, Barney and Jessikah, I can be really blunt. The second problem is everybody, is your listeners and me and you. Because what has happened is we've become tribalized. We tend to choose our news channels, our source of information, not because we want to learn what's happening, but because of bias confirmation. We want our opinions reinforced. We tend to rely on social media for information. That's not information. It's an echo chamber. And and not only that, but in social media, our content is being developed by algorithm. So some computer is deciding what you see based on your preferences. The result of all of that is that the United States of America has not been this divided since the 1850s, I'm sorry to say, that we are basically two tribes, red and blue, right and left, and the center isn't holding. The way you get back to civility and discourse and compromise is to end this process of political gerrymandering and make sure that there are platforms in journalism for equal time, fairness, and more balance.
What a wonderful answer. Thank you so much for just really sort of just going I guess in a straight line with that. And I'm super just moving forth a little bit. So Theodore's is named after a famous Long Island politician, which is Teddy Roosevelt, which is actually very funny because somebody had said, well, why isn't he calling it Steve's? And I'm like, think about where it is and think about, and they're like, oh, right, Teddy's, get it.
Yeah. So I've had many political heroes, among them Theodore Roosevelt. And I live in Oyster Bay. My wife and I live here. Her parents have lived, my wife's parents have lived in Oyster Bay for most of their lives. And Theodore Roosevelt was always a very strong influence on me. In fact, when you walked into my congressional office on Capitol Hill, I had an entire Theodore Roosevelt library. One of my cherished gifts was a copy of Mornings on Horseback that was given to me by General David Petraeus when he was commanding our military operations in Iraq. He and I continue to be students of history. And so Roosevelt, we were like a mini Sagamore Hill in my congressional office. And, Oyster Bay is all about Theodore Roosevelt. Also the American Revolution, of course, with Raynham Hall, which was treated and addressed in Alexander Rose's excellent book, Washington Spies, but also was this on the Netflix series Turn. Oyster Bay is the center of gravity for Revolutionary War history and Theodore Roosevelt history. So what better place for a bookstore, and what better name than Theodore's?
So, Theodores Books, you're getting ready to open. I see you're walking around. Our listeners are hearing, but
yes, because I'm trying to find a quiet place.
That's actually very funny. So we work in a library, and sometimes people will say to us, we can't find a quiet space, and that's because libraries are not necessarily as quiet as they have been in the past. So I love that you're saying that in general about your bookshop.
I'm walking the aisles here, and I'll tell you what, though, anything compared to Congress is quiet. So even when it's loud out of Congress, it's still quiet.
So how did this venture come about? It seems like an interesting venture this time of year, and this time of in this climate of business, where small businesses are in a lot of ways under siege and dealing with challenges from really the giant online vendors. But independent bookstores are in a different kind of position right now.
Well, Barney, I had this dream of opening up a small independent bookstore even before I went to Congress. It was always a dream of mine. And even when I was in Congress, my staff had instructions that no matter where I traveled, I needed to know where the local independent bookstore was because they were my retreats. So I learned a lot traveling across the country, visiting other congressional districts and seeing communities gather at a bookstore and libraries, by the way, also very much libraries. These became civic centers. When I left Congress, I really wanted to open up a store. At the time, this is pre-COVID, Oyster Bay, downtown Oyster Bay, it didn't have kind of the foot traffic that it needed to support a bookstore. And by the way, the Book Review, which was one of my favorite places on earth, was operating very effectively. In the past couple of months, the Book Review shut down and lost its lease. At the same time, Oyster Bay became it just blossomed, mostly as a result of COVID. Just blossomed a new artisanal chocolatier, a new wine studio, a beer place, a restaurant, 2 Spring Street. And a lot of that has to do with COVID. People just were tired of being stuck in their homes, wanted to get outside, wanted to not go to a big mall or a big box store, but, shop locally. And within the past month, literally, the circumstances were such that I was able to get a lease at 17 Audrey Avenue, get a contractor to build shelves. And you can hear from the ruckus behind me that this is the day that we're moving in.
That's terrific. It's funny that I say funny, and I mean it's really wonderful that out of all the doom and gloom and the pessimism that we dealt with during the height of this pandemic, everybody shut down. You're pointing out the way these small businesses are coming back and are beginning to flourish again, and it's almost kind of putting us all back into what life was like in small towns and talking locally, and that renewed sense of community, which is a wonderful
having a walkable space to just to kind of go into meander into different shops and it's lovely.
Yeah, and I think people kind of lost sight of what a downtown is and the importance of having the local proprietor, right? The local hardware store, the local bookstore, the local diner. But COVID was obviously a horrific experience, and it will be with us for a while longer, and certainly the memories will be infinite. But if there's any silver lining to this horror, it's that people returned to their downtowns and they began shopping locally. And I think that, that's the thing about America. From deep and dark pessimism, you can always find some optimism. And the fact that Oyster Bay is just opening up and there are so many new stores and shops, that shows you that, at least locally, there is a sense of optimism about our downtowns and the experiences that they provide.
So, Theodore's Books, what do you envision? What do you see happening? How do you hope to grow? And direction do you think it will be going?
Yeah, so, the store is going to specialize in history and current events, but we'll also sell what you would expect to buy when you walk into any independent bookstore. So we'll have New York Times bestsellers and Wall Street Journal bestsellers, and we'll have a new hardcover fiction and nonfiction, paperbacks. 40% of our inventory will be children's books, also games, puzzles, a lot of local history. And so we want this to be a place that contrasts with what I experienced in the United States Congress. There was amazing history in Congress, but it was overtaken by people yelling at each other. We want this to be a place where people can feel welcome, warm, hospitable. We don't care if you're conservative or progressive, couldn't care less. We just want you to be able to satiate your curiosity when you walk in here. We have a sign that we're posting on the window. Our only rule is, in accordance with the sign that we're posting, be nice or leave.
It says it
And
all.
yeah, I understand just because I have a little bit of history in the Syosset, not just Syosset Library, but one of my very first book related jobs was at the Borders in Syosset. And yes. I understand that you have a wonderful woman who you have hired, who I know very well to be your manager.
Well, her name is Peggy Zeiran, and we hired her to be our general manager. And I'm going to now. So this is breaking news on your podcast. I'm going.
Oh my gosh! Are we going to have? Are we going to have?
I'm going to interrupt her Peggy? Right now. So Peggy Zeiran. Forgive me for interrupting. So the team here at Theodores Books just broke for pizza, and in charge of the team is Peggy Zeiran. So this is
and
a podcast.
Hi, Jess.
Hi, Peggy. How are you?
How are you?
I am well. Welcome to Turn the Page podcast.
Why, thank you. This is my first podcast.
She said, guest starring Peggy Zeiran, special cameo appearance.
We're going to be working with Jessikah with some events with book plays, virtual events with authors. So.
Great.
Yes, that was the next thing I was going to mention. You know, another silver lining of everything is that we have been able to find ways to connect with authors and find ways to connect the public with authors. And because now we have, a new local bookshop opening, we're finding a way to partner with Theodores Books. We will be working with the publishers to send some signed book plates to Theodore. So if guests of some of our virtual events would like a signed copy of the book, they can purchase it through you. So that's a very exciting development as well. And I think I was thrilled when I heard I'd be reaching out with not just with Steve, but also with you. So welcome back to Syosset virtually.
Yeah, yes. So it'll be now the first event will be in February, correct?
Yes, February 10th, we are going to be hosting Dana Schwartz, who I should probably mention. I'll mention that I name dropped her in this podcast because maybe she'll retweet us. She's a podcaster, a history podcaster. Her podcast is called Noble Blood, and it talks about just different people of different walks of nobility and some crazy rumors and things that they did. But her book is called Anatomy, a Love Story, and it takes place in Regency, Edinburgh. So Dana will be virtually coming to the library, and Dana's signed books will be actually available at Theodore's.
That's right. And I'm looking forward. That book is right up my alley. So.
Yes.
Yes, indeed.
So Theodores will be the place where everybody can come to go right up their alley.
That's right.
And find the book they desire.
That's right.
And may I also say that we've assembled just an amazing team of booksellers. They all have specialties and an expertise in various books and forms of literature. So this is not a place just to shop, but a place to have a good conversation and learn something new.
That's right. We have most of our team are former employees of Book Review and Huntington. So we have a lot of experienced people here.
I mean, talk about like just kind of coming in at just the right time. Was this something that was planned before we found out that Book Review was going to be closed?
Yeah. So, I started thinking about this, years ago, 3 years ago when I left Congress. I began to think about it. But as I said, the market conditions just weren't optimal. I decided to expedite my search just about 4 months ago, and then of course when the Book Review did close down, and I'm hoping it comes back in some incarnation. I think it would be a wonderful thing for the community. However, when it closed down, I decided that it was either fish or cut bait. So I walked into a vacant store on Audrey Avenue, saw it, liked it, and signed a lease.
Absolutely. And I think another thing, because Barney and I have kind of talked about this, and I know I talk about it a lot on the page, is just how independent bookstores have, in a way, just sort of had this crazy, but in a good way, resurgence during the pandemic. I mean, people all but have written them off. And then you talk to people and they'd be like, oh, I can't find a bookstore anywhere. There's no more independent bookstores. And now every time I open up Book Awareness, they're talking about a new bookstore. They're talking about your bookstore. That's how we found out Peggy was working with you. They're talking about, just that sales are actually going very well for independent bookstores.
Independent bookstores have experienced a bit of a surge. Amazon and the ebook just created havoc for independent bookstores. So many of them went out of business as a result of those two convergences. But again, largely as a result of COVID. Think about people, who are quarantining and there's only so much binge televisioning that you can do. So people went back to books, and then they wanted to go outside, and then they wanted to go downtown, and they started returning to their independent bookstores.
So what's the target date for opening the shop?
We're going to be officially open on Thursday, November 18th, and then our formal ribbon cutting with our local dignitaries and officials and community activists and partners will be on Small Business Saturday, which is November 27th. But as of November 18th, people will be able to come in and see what we have to offer. We'll also have a 24/7 website, theodoresbooks.com, and it operates the same way Amazon does, only in our case, you can support your local independent bookstore. You can go to theodoresbooks.com, order any book that is on the market, and we will send it to you. So if your listeners have an interest in supporting the local merchant and a small independent bookstore, this is the way to do it. You can order your books online directly from theodoresbooks.com.
That's so exciting. And I will say, as a librarian, I think a lot of people had in the past maybe considered libraries and bookstores to be like the Jets and the Sharks, like one has to be sort of thinking the other isn't the best, but that's not the case. Especially when I started working at Syosset Library and Borders was still open, we would see a lot of the same people. And we still hear people come in and they're avid library users and they will say, no offense to the library, I wish we still had a bookshop also. And it's no offense taken. So do I. So I think, we're all a natural fit.
Well, there's no question. It's a true partnership. Every community needs in my view, a good local bookstore and a great library, and the two go hand in hand.
Well, I don't know about you, Barney, but I am marking my calendar for November 18th.
I already marked it down.
This episode will actually be airing on Thanksgiving. So reminding everybody that while you're doing your Black Friday shopping, go to, obviously if you're in the area, but if not, if you want to order from Theodores, go to Theodores Books in Oyster Bay. But I will definitely be going with my family because we are big bookstore people.
Well, we can't wait for you to see what we've done here.
And if TheodoreBooks.com goes well, in a few years, you might have your own spaceship.
That's right. Exactly.
We need to call this episode "Steve, Israel, and Space." it'll generate interest, and then they'll be like, "Oh, it's about a bookstore."
Yeah, well, some of my colleagues in Congress would have loved to send me to space, but it didn't work out that way.
Steve, I got to ask you a question also about the downtown situation there.
Yeah.
As a new store coming in, I'm assuming that you probably have had, and as a resident, contact with the local merchants. What's the sense downtown among the business owners and the shop owners? Is it optimistic that things are going to continue to go this way? Are they hopeful that it's going to become really kind of a vibrant scene again?
The optimism is palpable, at least in downtown Oyster Bay. And you can see for yourself what used to be boarded up storefronts are now opening. And as I said before, there's a wonderful artisanal chocolatier across the street from us, and a new wine studio, and a new bakery that was in Huntington that moved to Oyster Bay, and a new a place to go for beer. Artisanal beer maker, and it looks optimistic. It doesn't just feel optimistic. It looks optimistic, and the response by the local merchants has been overwhelming. Seeking partnerships with us, and the people who were building our shelves were complaining that they couldn't get any work done because people kept coming into this construction site wanting to know, when are you opening and how can we be involved? Can we put in an order? So there is such a wonderful sense of optimism in this downtown, and I think so many others.
That's terrific. It's wonderful to hear. I know my hometown. I live in town of Smithtown now, and again, it's a little bit behind, but things are starting to come back again. A lot of the vacant stores are being relet, repurposed, and it's a nice thing to see. You look busy, and we've taken up about a half hour of your time, and you look like, as I said, you're a busy guy today. I'm really looking forward to coming down, seeing the store. We wish you the absolute best. It's been great talking to you, and we'll see you soon.
And we look forward to working with you.
I want to thank you for doing this, and I do apologize that we chose the one day of the year where we're probably busier than any of the other days. But I'm glad that we could devote it to the Syosset Library, and we look forward to a partnership with you. And we will see you, I hope, on November 18th or November 27th here at Theodores Books on Audrey Avenue in Oyster Bay.
It's time to close this chapter of Turn the Page. Join us for the next episode.